I have been thinking and writing about polar exploration around the turn of the 20th century, and, more specifically, British polar exploration, in the so-called heroic age of that activity, something of a misnomer, I think, because it could just as well have been known as the catastrophic age of polar exploration, sending so many men to such a horrifying end. Whatever it is termed, no account of it could be complete without the inclusion of the stalwart Norwegian, Roald Amundsen. He was to that era what Babe Ruth was to baseball. It's probably unwise to single out any individual to represent an entire enterprise, be it baseball or polar exploration, because so many other notable people were involved, but I will stand behind my comparison of Amundsen and Ruth. Of course, there were many other great players in baseball, but Ruth changed the game, and he stood above it. Yankee Stadium really was the house that Ruth built, and Ruth wasn't joking when he was asked why he was paid more than the president, in answering, "I had a better year than he did." From all accounts, Ruth led a dissolute life, overindulging in food and drink, yet he managed to make tremendous accomplishments in a fantastically difficult sport. His lifetime batting average, but even more, for the Sultan of Swat, the Bambino, those gaudy home runs, hit at a clip that no one else could contest. He was a legendary figure even in his own playing days. And all of this from a player who began his career as a pitcher, and an excellent one at that. Enough of Ruth. My point is that he was one of a kind, incomparable. So too, Roald Amundsen. He achieved the triple crown of polar exploration, being the first man to reach both the North and South Poles, and was the discoverer of a Northwest Passage. His mother wanted him to be a doctor, so he went to school to study medicine, and he stuck it out until the day she died, at which point he left and went to sea. He was inspired by the stories of the polar explorers, particularly John Franklin. In 1897 he signed on with a group from Belgium. They did not get very far. Their ship was locked in ice, but Amundsen learned a few critical things. The ship's doctor was the American explorer Frederick Cook. Cook left the stranded boat and hunted for animals, feeding fresh meat to the crew so they would avoid the ravages of scurvy. From 1903 to 1906, Amundsen traversed a Northwest Passage with 5 other men in a small 45-foot fishing boat with a shallow draft and a gasoline engine. Along the way, Amundsen learned more about survival in the harsh conditions from the Inuit people he periodically encountered. Most important, he began to wear animal skins instead of wool, which was less than useless when wet, and he also started utilizing sled dogs. Cook and Perry and later Byrd claimed to have reached the North Pole, claims later disputed. So in 1911, Amundsen set out for the South Pole, with 4 sledges, 52 dogs, and 5 men. The dogs were valuable for their ability to withstand the cold and storms, their pulling power, and as a food source when that became a necessity. 11 dogs survived the trip, and Amundsen and his crew famously beat Scott and his men to the pole by 5 weeks. Amundsen avoided disaster with his thorough preparation. His experience led him to travel light, using the best equipment, clothing, the dogs, and skis. "Victory awaits him who has everything in order," he later wrote. Even the British celebrated him. At a party, this was the toast: "Here's to the dogs." He led other expeditions, running up considerable debt, and in 1916 he was credited with being the first man to reach the North Pole. By then he had left the dogs behind and was using the more modern and efficient airplane. He was in a plane in June of 1928 on a rescue mission when the aircraft crashed in fog and was lost in the Barents Sea. No matter what your transport, foot, ski, sled, or plane, every trip into that world was a risk of life, and no one knew that better than Amundsen, who could not be saved when his luck ran out. It was, I am sure, the way he wanted and the way he had to die.